the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. Recently, I saw this article. It sounded kind of funny, but then afterwards, it was kind of alarming to think about. So there's a new movie coming out. It's Space Jams 2. And you guys are probably maybe familiar with the first one. Michael Jordan starred in Space Jams 1. And it was Michael Jordan along with Looney Tunes, with Bugs Bunny and all those people were involved in it. And so now they did a Space Jams 2. LeBron James is going to be the star of it. And so some of you may be familiar with the character Pepe Le Pew. Pepe Le Pew is a skunk. He's supposed to be French. And if you ever watched the old Looney Tune cartoons, he was a very romantic guy. He was always trying to woo the girls and always very smooth and suave with the women. And so he's been actually removed from the movie, and he's been canceled from the movie. And one of the commentaries I read is they said that he was removed from the movie because of how he acted makes way for rape culture or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but this is alarming. And the reason I'm going to say this, I'm going to talk a little bit about cancel culture. I'm going to talk about some of the movements that have happened. So when we talk about like the globalist agenda or the takeover, there are certain things that they are using, and those things are meant to help to control the public as a whole. You know, there's a large amount of people, especially in America. You have over 300 million people, and worldwide you have about 7 billion people. And so one of the things that the powers that be recognizes is it's almost impossible to control the masses, right? It's so many people. Military force probably wouldn't work. It'd be very difficult, or trying to just impose the will of a minority over the masses is very difficult. But if they can control certain aspects of society, like the way they think, then they can control the people, right? They can get the people into compliance. And so you guys are probably familiar with this whole idea of cancel culture. Cancel culture is a modern form of ostracism in which someone is thrust out of social or professional circles, whether it be online or social media or in person. Those who are subject to this ostracism are said to have been canceled. And so, like I mentioned with Pepe Le Pew, who's a cartoon character who's been canceled because they said he fuels what's known as rape culture. But see, these things are absurd, and we have to be very careful when you look at all this, all of these type of censorship on social media, even in the news. And these things are very dangerous. That's why our First Amendment talks about freedom of speech, because the framers understood that one of the ways to control the masses and control how people think is to control language and control speech, right? And there's this phenomenon called groupthink, and I've described it before, but let me tell you about groupthink, and then we're going to get into some specific cases. I think it's good. And by the way, if you find benefit in these videos and this information, please subscribe to my channel. Please like and share. We are over 1,000 viewers now. So, subscribers, excuse me. So, some people are actually gravitating towards the messages. So, but anyway, groupthink, let me tell you about groupthink. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. Group members try to minimize conflict and reach a consensus decision without critical evaluation of alternative viewpoints, by actively suppressing dissenting viewpoints and by isolating themselves from outside influences. Now, why do I bring that up? See, groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that psychologists have studied how the human mind works, and they understand that most people want to fit into a larger group. Most people want to fit into a larger group. There's another thing called cognitive dissonance, and what cognitive dissonance is that your brain wants to maintain a certain level of stability. And so what do I mean by that? There's certain things that you kind of take as reality. And what cognitive dissonance does is it bridges the gap between a reality that you believe in and something that may seem extraordinary. Like, for instance, if I saw a person jump off of a skyscraper and land on his feet, that would be something that would go against my sensibilities. And so my brain would have to try to make sense of that, because if not, there's a fear that, hey, maybe I'm losing my mind, maybe I'm going crazy. So when you think about groupthink, you think about how people want to fit into larger groups. And so we naturally kind of assimilate our thinking to go along with the group. That's a natural phenomenon. Now, when I say these things, I'm not saying 100% of the time that happens, because we know that there's a lot of people that are independent. We know there's a lot of people who think for themselves. But I'm saying that even though you may think for yourself, there is a certain level of groupthink that all people adhere to. Now, you do have these people on the fringes. You have people that are like, mentally ill, or you see people, there's some people that completely have kind of detached themselves from society as a whole. I've known people that were maybe homeless or something, and they just go and sleep on a park bench, and they don't want to really have anything to do with society as a whole. So you do have those people, but those are very few and far in between. So all of us as human beings have a certain level of this groupthink, this desire or ability to try to fit in with a larger group of people. And so because the powers that be understand that, they use things like cancel culture. They use what is known as political correctness. Political correctness was actually created in a couple of different, what they call think tanks, where these intellectuals gather together and they come up with ways on how to kind of maximize their ability to influence society. So you had one from 1913 called the Frankfurt School, which was in Germany. And the Frankfurt School helped to shape a lot of the Nazi strategies that the Nazis employed through propaganda and other things in order to get the public as a whole to conform to the will of the Nazi leaders, right? Hitler was the leader of the Nazi party. And you also have what's known as the Tavistock Institute, which is another think tank. But anyway, these people, they get together and they kind of strategize or plan how they can move public opinion in a certain area or a certain way. So they came up with this idea of political correctness. Political correctness is pretty much the forerunner to cancel culture. And what political correctness is they start to frame or change language in a way to shape public opinion, because language helps to shape your viewpoint in life, your worldview. Language helps to shape your worldview, and culture is very much attached to that as well. And so anyway, so they came up with this idea of cancel culture recently. That's a new phenomenon, which is a precursor to political correctness. And what political correctness says is there's certain things that society as a whole holds that are true and are acceptable, and the other things they can't. Like, for instance, let me give you an example. I was a psychology major. I went to the University of Pittsburgh in the 80s, a psychology major. And when you study the human brain or the human mind, there's certain scientific things, like, for instance, retarded. For someone, if you said someone is retarded, that meant that they had a hindrance in their ability to learn or to think. And so that was a designation. But now, because of political correctness, you can't use that word. It's been deemed as being not politically correct, even though it is an actual phrase that was, an imbecile or idiot or those type of words. Those are words that if you look in psychology, they're actual designations, right? They're actual words being used. But now if you are on television or if you're in the public sector and you use that word, that would be considered politically incorrect. And most of the time when you see someone fall out of graces in those areas, they have to apologize or something like that. Using certain stereotypes is considered politically incorrect now. And they use that to shape language and shape culture. Before you used to have certain words that you could use and people would be okay with it. Now, if you don't use them, if you do use them, then that's considered politically incorrect and you'll get canceled, right? Cancel culture. So there's been a shift in our society as a whole, and it's a type of social engineering that frames the thoughts of the people through framing language. Now, here's a couple of things that was created by the powers that be. If you understand the CIA, so when we talked about the Frankfurt School, which was in Germany, and how they used their study of psychology and how groupthink operates, they used it in a way to help to promote the Nazi agenda. You had Joseph Goebbels, who was the minister of propaganda. You had Edward Bernays, who was the nephew, I believe he was the nephew of Adolf Hitler. Edward Bernays is considered the father of modern public relations. Before it was called public relations, it was called propaganda. and they studied how to use the media and other tools to shape public opinion, right? So all this stuff stems from that. And then you had in the OSS. So you had the OSS, which is the forerunner to the CIA. All this stuff, a lot of the technologies, a lot of the strategies that were employed originated from Germany, right? So the CIA created certain things in the 50s and 60s. You had a very strong anti-war sentiment when it came to Vietnam. And of course, we know with Vietnam, it was about money. It wasn't really about the Vietnamese doing anything. One of the things that they did, they created they created a false flag. There's this thing called the Gulf of Tonkin. And with the Gulf of Tonkin is that they put this story out here that a Vietnamese ship had fired on an American ship. And that was what they used in order to gain negative public opinion against Vietnam. And so they were able to get permission to go into Vietnam. But ultimately, Vietnam was about money. You had opium in Vietnam. They were the number one producer of opium during that time. And so you have the United States Army go into Vietnam and then mysteriously the opium or heroin, which comes from the poppy seeds, actually starts to flood the neighborhoods of the United States and other parts of the world. But that's another talk. I won't get too much into that. But anyway, you had the strong anti-war sentiment, and you had some other things that were happening internationally that the United States was doing during that time. And so one of the things that they started to do is they started to use several things through what they learned through the Tavistock and the Frankfurt School. So they created these movements. And I want you to understand that most of these movements that I'm going to describe are not organic movements. For instance, after slavery was abolished, and you had the Black community gaining strength and expanding, right? The families are growing, the communities were growing. And one of the things that happened is you had Marcus Garvey, who had this very much pro-Black. He was a Black segregationalist. He was going to gather a whole bunch of Black people. They were going to go back to Africa. And so the NAACP was actually created. It was a movement that was created to offset Marcus Garvey and some of those people that were creating a strong community. And they began to push this whole idea of desegregation. And so I'll get back to that at the end. But I want you to understand that the NAACP was not created by Black people. It wasn't a grassroots movement created by Black people. It was created by the powers that be. Another thing is you have the second wave feminist movement, and that was actually created by the CIA as well as part of their critical theory and political correctness, and all those things were things to use to weaken the society as a whole in order for to gain more control over the thoughts and the minds of the people of the nation. So, of course, you had the first wave feminist movement. The first wave feminist movement was women's suffrage, right? Women wanted the right to vote. They wanted to be equal, treated equal. They wanted right because there was a time where women couldn't vote. There was a time where women couldn't even, go to certain colleges and different things like that. So the first wave of feminism was women's suffrage. Now, I believe that women should be empowered, and I agree that they should vote. They should do anything that a man can do, anything that they're capable of doing. But what you had the second wave feminism that was created by the CIA. And so what the powers that be does, like through this social engineering, is they use real grievances and they exaggerate them and use them as a means of controlling the thoughts and the language of society. So second wave feminism was a period of feminist activity. It began in the early 1960s and it lasted for about 2 decades. Now, it would seem like it was just a grassroots thing that started, but it wasn't. There was a lady by the name of Gloria Steinem, who history shows us that she was actually a CIA person, even though she acted like she was a radical or a rebel. Here is from A Woman Who Changed the World. This is a book. This is about Gloria Steinem. So Gloria Steinem, under the guise of trying to be a feminist, and she was trying to, overthrow the male power structure, but she was actually a CIA plant. She pretended like she was a Marxist, but Intimate Conversations with Women Who Changed the World, 1997. Her bio blurb in June 1973, Miss Magazine states, Gloria Steinem has been a freelance writer all her professional life. Miss Magazine is her first full-time salary job, right? That's the narrative they promoted. But here's the truth. In 1958, Steinem was recruited by the CIA's Cord Myers to direct an informal group of activists called the Independent Research Service. This was part of Myers' Congress for Cultural Freedom, which created magazines like Encounter, Partisan Review to promote a left liberal chic to oppose Marxism. Steinem attended communist-sponsored youth festivals in Europe, published a newspaper, reported to other participants, and helped to provoke riots. And so this is one of the strategies that they use. They use real grievances of the past, which women were mistreated, and there was laws that went against them for a long period of time in this country. And so they used that. They started the second wave feminism, and the second wave feminism, which is part of cancel culture, is really created to erode masculinity. That's why you'll hear things like toxic masculinity and different things like that. They're trying to feminize men and dispower men and place women as superior to men. Instead of equal, they're trying to push women to be superior to men, this feminist movement. Also, especially in the Black community, they have this whole thing of the woman is the queen, she's always right, and these type of things. These are things that are intentionally being promoted in order to, to try to emasculate men, to try to erode at the family unit, and to restructure society in a way that weakens the culture overall and allows for people to be controlled easier. So when you get a chance, you can look that up. Gloria Steinem, supposedly she was a Marxist, but she was actually a CIA plant. Another one is the counterculture movement or the hippie movement. And so the hippie movement and the drug counterculture was also created by the CIA, even though it looked like it was Woodstock wasn't a grassroots thing that just occurred. If you guys are familiar at the very famous concert of Woodstock. But anyway, let me share some of this information with you. Did you know that the LSD and the hippies were invented by the CIA of the 1960s? There's a book that you can look. It's called, let me see. It's called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. Look that up when you get a chance. It's about Laurel Canyon. Laurel Canyon is a place where a lot of these rock groups came from. But it was actually part of a CIA governmental place that actually created the hippie movement. A lot of these rock musicians and the drug culture came from that. You had Timothy Leary, who was a Harvard professor who promoted the idea of using LSD and other psychotropic drugs. But it was actually created. They created this subculture to weaken individuals and so that there would be not this strong pushback against things like the Vietnam War and different things like that, and also to help control society. So people like Jim Morrison of the Doors, Frank Zappa, Papa John Phillips, and David Crosby were all children of high-ranking members of the American military. So Laurel Canyon is in Los Angeles. Charles Manson is from there. If you ever hear Charles Manson's interviews, he alludes to the fact that he didn't come up with all this stuff, that he was actually architected by the CIA and MK Ultra mind control. So Laurel Canyon was one time home to all these people that we mentioned. It was also the location of Air Force's 135 52nd Photographic Group. These factoids might not mean much to you, but according to the late conspiracy researcher David McGowan, they indicated a military psyop, a psychological operation of mind-blowing proportions. McGowan died in 2015, but the book that I mentioned to you is a good read. I've read the book, and it has some great information, gives you a lot of insight. A lot of the stuff we see is psychological operations. Psychological operations lines up with what I talked about with the Frankfurt School and Tavistock Institute, but they're shaping the culture. So when you see this move of the feminist movement, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's the media, when you hear this, the Me Too movement, which again, they use real grievances, they use real situations, but they exaggerate it to the place to control people. So when they say things like believe the woman, right? So automatically, if a woman makes an accusation, you're supposed to believe her without any type of proof or any type of evidence. And this is all part of the feminist movement to erode society. And the reason, especially as an African American male, this is very dangerous, because we know historically that has been used to destroy the Black community. If you know about Emmett Till, there was Austin Calloway. There's several other young men who actually got killed because they were falsely accused of something. They were falsely accused of either harassing or molesting a white woman or something along those lines, and they were killed. So we know that this can be weaponized, so you have to be very careful. Women shouldn't be believed, but evidence and facts should be believed. And so again, but because it is a political correctness, if you say you don't believe all women, then they'll say you're sexist or a misogynist, and they will try to put you through cancel culture. So that's one of the strategies that they use and continue to use. But again, when I talked about Laurel Canyon as part of the hippie countercultural movement, promoted the idea of drug usage. And most of these drugs, these psychotropic drugs, were actually created in a laboratory. Think about this: a hippie just out there, out in the world, how would they have come up with the idea of creating something like LSD or some of these other drugs that are obviously they're engineered in the laboratory? So they also have, if you think about the civil rights movement, or if you know about the civil rights movement, so the civil rights movement, which used, there was some real grievances historically because of slavery, Jim Crow, and all these other segregatory laws. And so they actually start to move to get civil rights, equal rights. Now, the civil rights movement was hijacked by the communists and other factions, even the government. You had COINTELPRO, you had the Black Messiah Project. So there's a movie out now. I've been talking about this for several years, but there's a movie out now called Judas and the Black Messiah, and it even talks about how the government would infiltrate, pro-Black civil rights movements and hijack the movements. You had the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. He came up with this idea of the Black Messiah. The Black Panthers were infiltrated by government people, right, posing as members of the Black Panther movement. And so they would hijack these movements, and even the communist movement was hijacked. And there's a gentleman by the name of Leonard Patterson, if you get a chance to look him up, and he was part of the Communist Party in the 30s and the 40s. He was a Black civil rights activist as well. And the communists came in and pretended like they were trying to help the Black community, but ultimately he realized that they were trying to use them to destabilize the country and overthrow America. And so he came out of the Communist Party. He stated that the communists taught them to use real grievances and exaggerate them in order to gain acceptance of the larger subgroup. And they taught them how to fan the flames, cause riots and unrest, and destabilize America. So what happened was then the civil rights movement, which now the Black Lives Matter movement, which is not an organic thing, is based in Marxism and other things. But because of political correctness, you can't disagree with them, especially if you're white, or you'll get canceled. If you don't believe in and adhere to this white supremacy or critical race theory, these are other terms as well, then they'll do what they call cancel you. But that's a way of shaming, of framing language, social engineering people in order to push their agenda forward. And ultimately, and this is the last point I'm going to make, is that the LGBTQ movement actually is the movement that is the latest one that has used the real grievances of African Americans to gain a foothold. Now, why do I say that? First and foremost, many times they've attached themselves to the civil rights movement, right? And civil rights, of course, was for people of color. You had the hate crimes legislation that protected people of color from discrimination and other things like that. And so you'll hear a lot of them, because they've attached to the civil rights movement. They'll say that the LGBTQ movement is the same as African-American movement, the Black movement. And that's not true, because civil rights is you just want to be treated as a human, just equal to everybody else. It has nothing to do with a behavior or lifestyle choices or anything like that. It's strictly the color of your skin. And they were fighting for civil rights, just a place to live. They could live where they wanted to, or drink out of a water fountain, or eat in a restaurant. That's all that they were asking for, and not be unfairly treated or targeted because of their skin color or their ethnicity, right? But what happens is they first and foremost attach themselves, saying that the movements are the same. One of the historical figures that they use is Bayard Rustin. If you're not familiar with Bayard Rustin, he was the one that helped Dr. Martin Luther King behind the scenes. He actually helped organize the March on Washington, right? But the Black Lives Matter movement is not about Black lives. It's about Black, transgender, and LGBTQ people. And the actual founders of Black Lives Matter says that. She says on several occasions that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're saying Black trans lives matter. So what they're doing is they're promoting the idea that Black transgender people are treated unfairly, and so they're fighting for their rights. It just so happens that they are attaching themselves to the Black movement as a whole, but ultimately their movement, they said, is a Marxist movement that's based on fighting for the Black trans lives, which is why now their new coloring book that they've come out to and their curriculum for schools focuses more so on reestablishing or redefining family as can be anything, 2 women, 2 men, polygamous, or whatever the case may be. And they've used that traditionally but of course, because you socially engineer and shape the language, it frames the conversation in a way that you can't disagree with them. You can't speak out against it, or else you are canceled in this cancel culture, political correctness thing. But you have to understand that these things are not by happenstance. They are part of a larger agenda. And so when I talk about these things, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about the agenda and the danger behind the agenda, because if you are not aware, as the Bible says, if you're not aware of the devices of the enemy, he will gain the advantage over you. And so we always have to have our eyes and our ears open, understand things from a historical perspective, and also look at the information that's out there. Do the research. I do the research. And so if you don't do the research, then you can be very easily duped into following something that is not beneficial for you, because as the Bible says, Satan can even disguise himself as an angel of light, and his ministers can do so as well. And so it comes under the guise that it's trying to help and benefit the community, but ultimately it takes us down a path that we don't want to go into. So this has been Joe Green. Until next time, peace and blessings to you.